Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to another Walking Dead video. So I want to talk about Laurent's ending in The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon Season 2 and how that could potentially set up a Season 3, or if it's not in Season 3, maybe it's a Season 4. I'm not sure when this would happen, but I do want to talk about his return and why it seems like his return could actually happen with Rick Grimes. And so yeah, I do want to talk about that in this video. So before we go any further, make sure to be a subscriber if you do want to get all my Walking Dead content like this. Where we saw Laurent's story end in Season 2 was that he actually made it out of France. And so obviously right now they're going to the Commonwealth. Carol does mention that in the finale as well, that, you know, by this time they're likely already at the Commonwealth. You know, Judith is probably there already talking with him or whatever she was saying. And so I think that it probably makes the most sense that he would be there. Like, I don't think this is going to be one of those things where Laurent doesn't actually get there and he like turns around because maybe Ash is like, you know what, we need to go back and help them because I think how we left and like the situation they were in was very dangerous for them. So we need to go back and help them. Like, it's not going to be something like that, or it won't be something where on their way they had to stop somewhere and then eventually they were like, you know, we need to come back. We're not going to make it there. And so they had to go and look for Daryl and Carol again, because then you're reintroducing the same storyline of having Laurent and Ash there and trying to get Laurent back to America again, because it's the same exact storyline that you just did. Like, I don't think they're going to do anything like that. It's going to be, I think, Laurent already in America. He's likely going to meet Rick, Michonne, you know, Judith, everyone else that's there. He's going to tell them where Daryl and Carol are, and then I think that the CRM are going to be involved because, again, we learned at the very end of The Ones Who Live, and I think a lot of this was set up from Gimple. Like, I just think the fact that you have the Civic Republic there, that you're able to actually get resources from them, and obviously they have like ships, they have like helicopters, planes, and like everything. You're able to get to France pretty easily, right? Like, if you get the CRM's help, you're going to be able to get there pretty easily. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think Carol doesn't know about Rick either, is because I think if she knew about Rick and Michonne and the CRM, then she would probably get their help to get Daryl, right? And so obviously she doesn't know that because she would do that. And so it makes sense for Laurent's story that they would actually try to do this here. And so I want to get into Gimple's quote here, because obviously this is me sort of theorizing a lot of this here, but I want to get into exactly what Gimple said on the future of Laurent and could we actually see him again. And so I saw this here in an article from Screen Rant, but this came from another article, I believe, by Entertainment Weekly. There was actually a lot of discussion on the finale and some of the future and whatnot, so I'll do videos breaking down all of that here. But yeah, I saw this from ScreenRant.com, and so what Gimple actually talks about in terms of, you know, are we ever going to see Laurent again? He says, I got a text from Louis, the actor who plays Laurent, all but asking the same question. He's actually much more polite than that. He was just checking in. It's a garden of forking paths. There are different things I've been working on, and I have absolutely played with how Laurent might fit within those things in America. You have all these pivot points like, oh, if we're doing this, we can't do that. Or if we stop doing this, we can't do this. Or what do we need here? And who's available then? But yeah, he's absolutely in mind. Louis is terrific. Laurent was wonderful and such a great character to bring different things out of Daryl. I am a fan. And so reading that, I think that Laurent is eventually, he's going to return. He's going to be a big part of whatever story is happening next. And it's going to be very obviously connected with Daryl. And I think that it makes sense that it's going to be involving Rick Grimes, unless there's some other project that, you know, is going to happen at some point in the future. I think that it's most likely going to be that aspect of the story here, and how the next story for Rick Grimes is going to be likely to try and find Daryl. I don't know if he gets to Spain right away, but that could be an aspect to it, and then Laurent could be involved in that story, because it's not going to be Dead City. Dead City is, I think, 5 years in the future as of right now. I believe that the story currently is, you know, I think it has to catch up to that show, which I think it eventually will. I know I see that complaint a lot with Dead City, but they will eventually catch up to that show's timeline. Like, that show's not going to be in the future forever. It was the same thing with Fear the Walking Dead. For like a couple of seasons, it was set like 6 or 7 years back in the past, and it was just so weird watching the show, seeing Morgan still around the timeline where Rick was first taken by the CRM, right? And then the show was like 6 years into the future, even 7 or 8 years into the future, you know, and just focused on a totally different timeline. So Fear the Walking Dead eventually caught up with them. You know, they jumped forward 6, 7, 8 years or whatever it was. And so I think that Daryl Dixon will as well. I think that The Ones Who Live season 2, like if they do that, I don't know if it's going to be a season 2 of that show or a new series. You know, Rick and Michonne seem to, or Andrew Lincoln and Denai Guerrera, they seem to be very interested in coming back to do another story. So it's likely going to be set a couple of years after The Ones Who Live's ending, because I think that that just makes a lot of sense, right? And also, this way you can say that the Grimes family had some, I guess family time, together for the last couple of years, because I know that that's something that is an issue for a lot of people, which is, if they do a season 2, there's going to be a lot of issues. And like, if they eventually kill off Rick Grimes, it's, I think some just want Rick Grimes to have a happy ending overall. And so the ending that we got there, I mean, I think that's why you sort of have to let that ending be the ending for a bit. I think that if they did a season 2 in the next like 2 years, that's fine, but set it like 4 or 5 years into the future. And this way, I mean, that's the thing too, you sort of have to coordinate it with what's happening with Daryl Dixon. And so that's what I mean. When you actually look at what Gimple was saying here, he seems to really tease that, yeah, Laurent is going to come back at some point in the future here, but he's talking about how Laurent might actually work in a story in America. And he talks about pivot points, which is really interesting because I've heard him talk about this a lot over the last, I don't know, however many years, but he'll reference things of like, well, we thought we were going here, but because of this, we had to go to, this direction here. And so I think that that definitely does work in terms of how they've handled The Walking Dead over the last couple of years. Like, they all thought that The Walking Dead was going to be going in a totally different direction, and then AMC was like, well, we're going to be ending it after season 11 and then doing these spin-offs, right? Like, originally they thought The Walking Dead was going to get 14 or 15 seasons, maybe more, and then eventually Daryl and Carol would make it back to that show, right? But obviously that's not what happened here overall. And because Gimple never really committed to certain storylines and really introducing a lot of stuff like the Triple P card and certain CRM storylines, that it made it easier to end it there. Because could you imagine if they actually introduced a lot of like CRM stuff in the very final season, or even in season 10, and then all of a sudden they had to wrap it up that fast? Like, I think in terms of them introducing, the Reaper arc and whatnot, that was one of the things that we saw. Like, they got into that storyline a little bit. They already wrote a bunch of stuff, and then they had to end everything. And so that's why the Reaper arc was, it was rushed. And I think that that's why we don't get these storylines completely fleshed out right away until Gimple knows that, okay, we can fully tell this story here. And so that's why he talks about pivot points of like, all right, well, if we're going to do this, we can't do that. And that's exactly what he says here. Like, oh, if we're doing this, we can't do that. Or if we stop doing this, we can't do this. Or what do we need here and who's available then? I think a lot of that really is, what he's thinking about in terms of future storylines. So I do think that Laurent is eventually going to be in the story again, but I just think that it makes sense that unless they do a spin-off that they're going to announce at some point here in the next like couple of months or something, I think that it's likely going to be that he's going to be in the next show or season of The Ones Who Live, or whatever they're going to call it. And I think a big part of that story is going to be them trying to find Daryl, or again, this could be like the end game, or this could be set up for the reunion, right? Like, this could be how The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon ends, is Rick returns with Laurent and the CRM, and they save Daryl and Carol and go back to America, and then that sets up some sort of huge battle or like final arc or whatever, for all the characters to be reunited, and it'll probably happen in America or something. And so we'll have to wait and see where all this goes overall. But I think that Laurent's return with Rick Grimes makes a lot of sense. I think that if, it doesn't happen like that, because maybe it comes down to Andrew Lincoln, like maybe he doesn't want to return necessarily on that show. Like, that is something that I think, after he left The Walking Dead, he didn't want to come back to just like do little appearances here and there or like whatever. He only did Rick Grimes moments when it made a lot of sense. Like, he didn't even want to, be there in the very last episode of The Walking Dead because he didn't want to take away from that story. He wanted it to make sense overall with The Walking Dead. And so when they convinced him of like, well, this is how it's going to make sense, like it's going to tease the future, but because of what they were saying in that very ending there, where it sort of talked about the ending of all of this, and they, made all these connections, it worked really well. And so I think that you would have to convince Andrew Lincoln that him being on The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon would make a lot of sense. And I just think that because it's Rick Grimes, like, he wouldn't just show up, in a random moment like that, unless it was like the very final episode of The Walking Dead Daryl Dixon, or I don't know, like maybe there was something there. But I really do think that this was for sure set up for the future. Like, that is one of the things, like, I think that maybe this could happen in season 3, but maybe they really push it off to season 4 or 5. Like, I don't know how long this show's going to be going on for before they get into the reunion. I think that for sure 4 seasons, but this could be the end of season 4 where we see Laurent, or maybe season 3 ends with that sort of teaser that Laurent made it back to the Commonwealth. He's talked with Rick Grimes and they're going to try and save Daryl. And then maybe season 4 is all about, focusing on building to that moment. I think that just going based off of Gimple's quote here, he's really trying to work out a bunch of stuff. And I think that it is likely going to happen. I think that this is something that makes a lot of sense for the story, because somehow you have to get Daryl back to America. And it's either, really only 2 options: is somebody from America, like the CRM, saves him, or he just goes back on his own. And I mean, that obviously could be possible, but I just think that if Laurent is going there, the CRM are there. They're going to find out about Daryl and Carol and where they are. Rick is also going to learn that Daryl spent years and years trying to find him, and the only reason why he's in France is because he was out there looking for him. Like, that's such an important part to all of this. So I think that Rick is going to feel bad, and Rick is probably going to feel very obligated to, like, yeah, you know what? I need to find Daryl because he was out there searching for me for years. The least I can do, you know, I made it back here. We're fine. We're safe now. Yes, I have to leave again to go and find him, but like, I need to do this. Like, we need to bring Daryl and Carol home, because if something bad happens to them, like, could Rick ever live with that? You know, like, Daryl and Carol have done so much for everybody. Like, I think that it just makes sense that it's not even going to be a thought. Like, that's going to be something that they're going to do immediately. And if Rick and Michonne didn't do anything like that, that would be such a big issue. And also, that's the one thing too, if Laurent goes back to the Commonwealth, doesn't mention anything about Daryl, like, that's also a big issue I would criticize so much. And that makes no sense. So again, I think that's why a lot of this to me is almost like, I mean, it's not 100% confirmed, but I just feel like it makes sense that this is where the story is going to go. Like, he's for sure going to meet with Rick and Michonne, and he's going to tell them where Daryl and Carol are. There's going to be all of that, like the Commonwealth and like the CRM, they're probably going to learn about a lot of this. And I think in terms of, you know, when Rick eventually reunites with Daryl and sort of how all that happens, that's what's to be determined right now. But I think Laurent will for sure meet with them. And I think that could be really the beginning of, you know, a season 2 of The Ones Who Live, if they do that. So we'll have to wait and see, you know, where this builds to. I think that for sure before that ever happens, I've seen a lot of people saying that, well, you know, before Rick and Daryl reunite, we sort of need to build to that. And I would like to see Rick and Morgan reunite. And so maybe the premise of the next season is Rick is trying to, you know, find Daryl or whatever, and then, you know, before he leaves, something happens, and then he reunites with Morgan, and there's just like this whole other story that happens in that season, building to, you know, eventually, like, we're gonna go and find Daryl. I'm happy that we actually see some of the setup happening here, though. Like, I think, you know, throughout this year, and I will do a video at some point talking about 2024, because like, this year started off really amazing because there was so much excitement for The Ones Who Live, but it ended kind of, you know, in a bad way where a lot of people weren't that excited about The Walking Dead. And then throughout 6 or 7 months waiting for the show to air, there just wasn't a lot of excitement overall. And then watching Daryl Dixon season 2, it wasn't the most exciting. There were moments here and there that were really cool. The finale definitely, I think, fixed a lot of issues. And then we saw the trailer for season 3. We saw how some of the storylines ended, and now there's a lot more excitement here. And I think they still gotta do some more building here, but it's going in the right direction right now, which is exciting. So yeah, definitely post your thoughts down below. When do you think Laurent is going to return, and do you think he's going to return with Rick Grimes? Post all your thoughts down below. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.